Howdy and welcome to Moose Podcast 220. Kind of an interesting number to finish out the year 2020, Podcast 220. Well, with that in mind, howdy and thanks again for dropping on by and giving me a listen. You guys have just been an incredible group of fans and supportive colleagues in this process of 2020 podcasts. I can't thank you enough for all that you have done, you said, shared, and of course, how you've promoted the podcast. It's been absolutely just wow. Thank you ever so much. Also want to thank my good friends at Bedford's Camera, bedfords.com, for supporting the podcast this entire year. I know a lot of people feel it's been a real struggle and it's been a real downer. And in some ways, it's definitely not been what we imagined. But I like to look at the bright side. And for me, one of the big bright sides is all that you guys have done and shared with me keeps me wanting to share more with you. So thank you, one and all. And remember, when you go to Bedford's, use that special discount, MOOSE. Save yourself some real money. Most of the time, you're not going to pay any shipping or sales tax. And you can deal with experts who've got a lot of gear in supply. So make sure you head to Bedford's, bedfords.com, ask for that Moose discount. Hey, give yourself a end-of-the-year present. You deserve it. I want to get right into this week's podcast. And I got to be honest with you, figuring out a title for this week's podcast, it could have gone either way, positive or negative. So that is the title, positive and negative. Now, I got this really long email a while back from a real nice gentleman named Chris. And, well, Chris, well, let me start off why he says I'm saying this podcast is positive and negative. He starts off this email by saying he started following me back when I had my original website, the very first one, and the first, literally the first out there on the planet for wildlife photography back in '95. And he reminds me of how when you open and launch the page, you'd hear my F5 shutter just free flying, as he put it. Said I made him jump right out of the chair. He happened to tune in at 2 a.m. for the first time. Good old times. Good times. Then he goes on and says he was in high school when that happened. Reminders that I'm getting old? Yeah, they're not welcomed. So that's the negative part. Anyway, he talks about how his own travels in photography, and when he was at a low point, that he turned to some of my ramblings, and it got through those low points, and he's out there with a P7000, and now has his own son, and they're out there sharing photography, and that's really the positive side. What makes sharing just so amazingly good. And he's remembered quite a bit about my past that I've shared with you. And, well, the one thing he brings up is, I started my career back at Desert Storm when I could not, selling a picture of critters wasn't going to happen. And so then he first question is, in this year of the pandemic, he wanted to know if how similar or different do I think not only the market is for wildlife photography, but photography is now in regards to wildlife and conservation. So to answer that first question, the marketing of critters, to be honest with you, Chris, in 2020, I did not submit to any editors one article about critters. So that's how different I thought it was. I didn't see that much coming out about individual critters. I mean, they're out there in certain magazines, like Birding, things like that. But in the popular press, magazines like your basic magazine, they were kind of hard to get out there. There was a lot of other things people wanted to see, at least as far as editors are concerned, and write about. Keep in mind that there's often a 2 to 6 month lag. So in January or February or March, if they decided they needed critters, you wouldn't be seeing it right away. So that's part of it. And then when it comes to wildlife photography, second part of this first question, I saw a huge uptick in wildlife photography, have for about the last 18 months, 2 years. And wildlife photography goes in cycles, very much so. It goes up and down, and right now it's very much on the up, and I'm grateful to see that. Then the last part of your question, what about conservation? Well, that definitely comes under the positive and negative moniker for this particular podcast. So for my little window, and you got to keep in mind that's all this is from, I see more individuals involved in conservation in this year of the pandemic, which is great. I see less corporations involved in conservation, and that's really bad. And while I am the first one to say continually that your photographs can make a difference, and they do, and I've seen it, and I witness it almost daily. On the grand scheme of things, though, we all need to be doing it to really affect our world when it comes to the corporations. The ones who are really pushing buttons for the better or the worse. Had a person asking me not too long ago a question about my own and Sharon's efforts back in the 80s and 90s to get a lot of little spots. And I'm talking, 30, 50 acres, 100 acres saved for a particular species. And we fought hard to get those little plots saved for those little critters. And we were successful a lot of the time, vast majority of the time. The problem is that now the way we have accelerated our climate change and exacerbated its effects, those little plots, are kind of like going to be a graveyard because those critters can't get away from those spots, and the changes are happening much bigger than any person can protect, except for corporations. That's the negative side of conservation. That's the reality of it. So a lot more people involved hopefully will get corporations to get and turn around. So Chris goes on with this. I tell you, this is one long email, dude. I mean, seriously. Anyway, he goes on talking about the lockdown and partial layoffs and how he spent a lot more time because of that in his own corner of the world in the woods, out there quietly hiking trails with his camera. But now with the pandemic, these trails are inundated with people. And his first negative was he picked up a whole lot more trash on his trails than he ever has in the past. And he didn't think it was all because of just people. He thought a lot of it was what he says he saw firsthand, photographers causing issues. And he's wanted to know what my thoughts were about that. Because he said all the pictures had negative results because of that. Well, yeah, I've mentioned more than once on a podcast. In fact, not too recently, the experience we had in Yellowstone with the red fox. And yeah, Chris, I'm afraid that is the negative side of wildlife photography. The overwhelming desire and need to get that photograph, whatever that photograph is, which still kind of eludes me even after 40 years, makes a lot of photographers do things that I think if someone were to shoot a video of their actions and then play it back for them later, I think they would cringe at their own actions. I don't think the vast majority of those egregious things I see are malice of heart. They are just getting tied up in the moment. Now, it's still the same end result as far as a critter, definitely. But it gives me hope that maybe if they were to take a deep breath, maybe become more enlightened, they might actually turn from a negative to a positive and get to the point where, like I love to say and try to say all the time, no photograph is worth sacrificing the welfare of a subject. With that said, we could tie it back to your earlier question when it comes to conservation. A lot of wildlife photographers are getting more and more in the role of sharing their photographs with a great lot of people. And that in itself is a great way of conservation. You, me, a lot of other people have been very fortunate this year, very fortunate that even with all the pressure of society dealing with the pandemic, we have been able to get out with our camera. We had a camera. We've been able to photograph so many great wonders and share them. Now, the critters, I feel, and I've seen in my limited travels, have kind of been celebrating that a lot of places, the people aren't there. And that's kind of cool. And there's a handful of stories where some critters had a pretty great 2020 because they had no pressure from humans. And they needed that year off. So that's all very good stuff. What will 2021 bring when it comes to photography and critters and conservation? Well, it kind of comes up with, what you kind of ended up as winding up your email, where you said, I'm trying to find a balance myself. I shot a ton my first year as a father and nearly not at all this past year. That kind of is a summation for what we might be having in 2021. We've got to keep moving that ball forward, which means we have to keep shooting, we have to keep pushing to be a better photographer and then share more. Because as we slowly get out from behind this cloud, and there's no doubt that people are very weary of all that's happened, that we keep grasping for the bright side. Understand that if you didn't have that negative, you would not understand the positive or treasure it just as much as we do to keep wanting to have it. It's a weird thing about us, but we have to have both the positive and negative to have the positive and the negative. And my heart goes out to all who have been affected by COVID in any way, shape, or form, because it's been there or done that, and it takes a toll. And it takes a toll on your soul, it takes a toll on your spirit, and that takes a toll on your photography. But I think that, at least for me, speaking for myself, when I get behind that camera, it tends just to make things a little bit better. And then having that successful photograph, a little bit better, even more. And then finally, when I get to share that photograph, it comes full circle, just like your email. Because at some point, you're going to be taking over my spot, Chris. You're going to be the one out there shooting a lot, getting published, doing the podcast. And in 40 years, someone's going to send you the email saying, I remember when I was in 7th grade and I first learned about you as a photographer. Because that's how this all works. That's the positive and negative of this whole thing. And it's all good stuff. It's how the world should be. So thanks for that great email, Chris. Thank you all for a great year. And remember to make every click your story.